Thank you all for this opportunity, and some of you who came to Research Day last year might remember me as a researcher on the Living in Harmony project, which is one of the many interdisciplinary projects here at Woolf, looking specifically at interfaith encounter through music and memory in historical Iraq and Syria. And since last year, however, as Miriam mentioned, I have now changed my role a little bit and become a PhD scholar here at the Woolf. So today I'm just going to be sharing you kind of a little bit of my PhD proposal, what I'm proposing to do since I just started it a month ago. So I'm going to start with this quote from Penelope Lively's book, Life in the Garden, because when I read it the first time, it gave me the visual imagery I needed to help contextualize some of the abstract concepts I've been thinking about for the past year at Woolf, concepts I will be engaging with for my PhD research. So she says in her book, I grew up in a garden, almost literally because this was a hot, sunny garden in Egypt. My mother had created our garden very much in the spirit of the English garden, with lawns, rosebuds, lily ponds, pergola walks, and a necessary nod to the climate and what would grow there. Though she did once plant daffodil bulbs, which were rightly aghast at what was required of them, and sent up just a few spindly blooms. So the image of a British daffodil bulb struggling to grow in the Egyptian desert reflects the questioning at the heart of not only my research proposal, but also my personal experience growing up as a child of Syrian immigrants in America. And this is because when people migrate to a new place, they carry with them memories, recipes, languages, music, and even daffodil bulbs. So this process, remaking home in diaspora, has generated much scholarship across various fields in the social sciences and humanities, especially considering the postmodern global reality of the mass movement of peoples, whether through labor migration or through conflict-induced displacements. And the central question driving this research is how one learns to cultivate that spindly bloom representing the home culture in a new social and cultural context, preserving the essence of the flower while adapting to the new environment. And I'm planning to add to this body of literature by conducting ethnographic fieldwork with Syrian musicians in Turkey. My questions will center on the use of musical, cultural, and aesthetic expression, not only to remake home in diaspora, but also to act as a mechanism for agency and resilience in their new contexts. So how are Syrian musicians using their craft to create a voice for themselves in Turkey? Are there structural and political forces that impede or support this expression? And I've chosen music as artifact, as text, and musical production, music as social expression, as my medium of analysis because, as ethnomusicologist Martin Stokes claims, the musical event, from formal concerts to private listening, evokes and organizes collective memories and present experiences of place with an intensity, power, and simplicity unmatched by any other social activity. Also, the philosopher Giorgio Agamben recognizes that musical language breeds identity in political thinking from birth. So consequently, music is not only key to remaking home in diaspora, but it also acts as a medium for the reimagining of new identities, as studies in ethnomusicology around nostalgia, hybridity, and acculturation have explored. So it's important to note that what I've proposed is very much based on insights that I gained while doing fieldwork for the Living in Harmony project last summer, particularly during my time in Istanbul, interviewing and observing Syrian musicians and music teachers in the city. So for the Living in Harmony project, I was looking at the ways in which Syrians and Iraqis today, those across the wider diaspora from various faith communities, so Arab Jews, Arab Christians, Arab Muslims from that part of the world, I was just trying to see how they were using Arabic or heritage music to remain connected to the homeland and to renegotiate a new sense of self in their environments. And that's what took me to Istanbul last summer, because there are now about 600,000 Syrians living in the metropolis as a result of the mass migration out of Syria since the start of the conflict in 2011. Thank you. So while I was working with Syrian musicians in the city, I became curious about a few things that got me thinking about the effects of integration on music making and more generally on cultural practices and imaginaries. For example, many Syrian musicians kept referring back to the shared Ottoman legacy between Turkey and Syria. And in their mind, this was evidence for the similarities between Turkish and Arabic music. So, they can't really be outsiders if at some point Syrians and Turks were all citizens of the same empire. A lot of them were also, especially the instrumentalists, were learning new Turkish technique. So there were changes in performance practice happening, and some of them were interacting with new spaces, such as Ahmed Mulhim, who has now become a street musician in Istanbul, something he never did in Syria, because street performance is not a normative practice back home. So these are the things that I'd like to further explore for my PhD, and I hypothesize that the Syrian cultural imaginary is shifting as a result of emplacement into Turkish society, and that this shift can be illustrated through musical practices. So I'll end with a visual example of what I hope to capture in my study. This is Dolmabahce Mosque, which is a Baroque-style masjid that opened in Istanbul in 1855. And when I first saw this mosque, I was struck by its European-style architecture, so much so that I thought it could be easily mistaken for a historic church in London. For example, if you look at the minarets, they are columns, Greek columns, which is what initially attracted me to the mosque when I was walking past it. So, the mosque was built during the 19th century at the height of Ottoman contact with Western Europe. And this got me thinking about the idea of tradition as a construction, because in reality, our traditions, whether religious practices, social behaviors, music, architecture, are always a mix of thoughts, sounds, and rituals we collect from elsewhere and reinvent to make our own. But because of our human desire and need to be from somewhere, to be rooted in a community, religion, or landscape, we often ignore the historical particularities that create our reified traditions, histories that always include contact with other populations, religions, and cultures. And I look forward to documenting this contact and transformation through the lived experiences of Syrian musicians as they make a new home for themselves in Turkey. Thank you.